Thanks everybody. Is everybody here or noise? So welcome to my talk about cost management. So a little bit about me. So I think most people here sort of recognise from previous events. So I'm Stephenson. I'm based in Newcastle. I live quite at Hollystone near Silverlink. I've worked in the Azure space for pretty much ever since it first came out in preview. So I worked with companies down in London doing an early adopter Azure implementations, and I've pretty much worked with Azure ever since. Been a Microsoft MVP for 15 years as well. More recently, I have a new job as the product owner for Turbo 360, which is a sort of ISV product in the Azure space. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk about what I was doing last year. So I did a lot of freelance consultancy, and as part of my job, what I found over the years, in addition to Azure projects, was cost management. Was always something I kind of cared quite a lot about, making sure I was spending the customer's money well. But because of my experience with Azure, it really became a much bigger thing that I was involved in, looking at where people are spending their money, are we spending the money efficiently? And that led to me ended up becoming the product owner for Turbo 360. So in this talk today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did using Turbo 360, but actually the talk's really about the principles of what we did rather than the products. So everything I talk about here you can do with other products, whether it be out of the box Azure tooling, whether it be another third-party product. But what I really want to get across is the thinking about how do you think about what you spend on Azure, how do you tune, and I'm going to tell you a lot about some real-world tuning that we did. So what things did we do that saved that customer money? And I think in the talk, hopefully you'll see that we actually saved quite a significant amount of money, and I want people to go home with a takeaway of ideas. You can look at your company or your customer, can you save money by doing some of these things? Now, really I think for me, what's really important is this diagram here. So customers have been implementing Azure for a long time now, and everybody's really focused on digital transformation, change the business, do new things, innovate, empower users to solve business problems. And the thing they forgot about is that we weren't really keeping an eye on, is this cost sustainable? So we deliver this great project. Nearly every customer I speak to complains about how their Azure bill just keeps getting bigger, how it feels like we don't know if we get good value for money or not. So that's what we want to start redressing. I think the problem we find is a really increasing theme of companies getting involved in this. Conversations and customers are like increasing in terms of how frequent they are. So hopefully today you'll go with lots of ideas that we can maybe take back to work. Now, when I talk to customers, so if you imagine nowadays I'm talking to customers every day about how they do cost management. Some of the stories I hear are just amazing. The amount of money people are spending on Azure, the amount of money people waste on Azure is quite impressive as well. I think as a ballpark, most of the customers I see have around about 30% waste in their cloud spend, which is quite staggering really when you think about it. And, we come across companies that spend anywhere from 5,000 a month, 2,000 a month kind of range. We speak to companies who are spending multiple millions a month, so that wastage is just staggering. So when you think about your company, ask yourself the question, who's responsible for cost, who's accountable for cost? And this really comes to the crux of the problem, is what I find most companies have this one person who's the central Azure admin expert who has access to the billing data. They have no concept of what that money gets spent on, so they don't really understand the solutions. And then you have all these people who build different solutions but have no access to the billing data. So there's this real disconnect here, and everybody's going, well, I see part of the problem but I can't do anything about it. We've got the senior management up at the top complaining that they're spending too much money. Now, the fact is it's just not really anybody's job to fix that problem. So everybody kind of focuses on their little world, delivering their new project, but nobody's addressing the big picture problem here that we're spending more money. So often I'll ask customers things like, what is the best cost saving that you've had? People often don't really think about that. Sometimes people have done really cool stuff. Things like where are your risks in your spend. You know, I had a great question a few months ago from a company who said, well, we only spend a tiny amount on Azure, we're a startup. Do we really need to think too much about cost management? Is that not something big companies think about? And the question is, well, okay, that's one way of looking at it, but you've got the opposite problem of risk. How much would you have to spend on Azure accidentally before you bankrupt your company? You know, you start a kill because somebody spun up a VM that was too big and suddenly you get a monthly bill, bang, you're bankrupt. So it's not just a big company problem. Now, what I'm going to talk about next is if you think of this company that I was doing some work with, big company, many year investment in Azure integration, doing lots of integration projects across the board, different applications like SAP, Dynamics, that kind of thing. I thought we had quite a lean sort of implementation. I didn't think we had a lot of waste. We certainly had more than what I thought we had, which was quite interesting and eye-opening for me. I want to talk about the steps of how we sort of change the way we work to be more cost-focused, and then I'm going to talk about how that's spread out from our team to the rest of the company. So if you imagine, there'll be people in your organisation who care more about cost than others. We decided that on the project we were on, we really wanted to sort of closely look at where we were spending our money, because we were doing this migration project and we knew our costs should reduce, but we wanted to be able to prove that with evidence to back it up. So here, how we started. So we decided to start looking at a third-party product to help us. So this is what Turbo 360 looks like. As I say, you can do these kind of things with Azure out of the box components. We just picked this because it was easier for us to achieve what we wanted. But the principles of how we do this is step number one. If you look at the FinOps Foundation and their recommendations on how to do cost management with FinOps, the first thing you need to do is democratize cost data. So we need to be able to make the people who build and run a solution understand and see how much it costs. They're the best people to work out how to save money because they know what it does. So this idea of democratization. And what we would do here is at the tree view. So we can see that area here, we create a node for the integration team to be able to see all of the integration costs. Now where it gets challenging is every customer on Azure is a little bit different. So sometimes you'll have one company where you might have one subscription per team and everything for that team's in it. You might have other companies where you might have, each team has 40 or 50 subscriptions. Sometimes you've got different tenants. Sometimes you might have a company who only has 2 subscriptions, but they have hundreds of resource groups in it. So you've got all these different ways people configure stuff. So when you don't have a standard, it's hard to kind of create a consistent model. So this is where really we felt this tool helped us. But we started, we modeled the integration team to begin with, and then we decided after that we'll start digging deeper into our own costs. So we created ways of looking at what's our production cost versus our development cost. What do different integrations cost? If you imagine they might have built over 100 integrations doing different things. Can you get to that point where you can say, this customer on board and integration costs X per month? That's the kind of place we were looking to get. So we started off democratizing, create the scope so people can see their costs. And then like here we're looking at, can we create easy graphs to be able to show what this team cares about? So then this one here is an example. It's a way where I can look at the integration team as a whole across all of their resources and all their environments and get a comparison last month versus this month. How do we look? We can start then doing things like cost reviews, so I can dig deeper and do lower level analysis on that. Now, once we got the team set up, we then, step 2 is we've got to get into some monitoring. So we need to know how much are we spending now. If we break that, we want to know straight away with an alert. So here what we did is we've got at the top, we've got a group budget. So that lets me configure, I don't know how much everybody's looked at Azure cost management already, but if you start configuring alerts, you're really looking at either really low level alerts like resource group level, which if you've got loads of resource group, that's a lot of work to set it up, or high level alerts at subscription level and that kind of thing. So here we use the group budget. We just say, regardless of what our setup is, let's create an integration team budget. We start there. In this case, I think we were using a daily budget, so if we break that budget, we get an alert. We then can create lower level budgets as well if we want, so we can create a prod environment, one, a dev environment, but we're not tied to this deployment model. And then down here you'll see anomaly detection. So this is a really important feature as well. If you have cost anomalies come up, so say I've got an integration or a service that starts costing a lot more than it normally does. You want to know about that as quick as you can. And that's what that feature's about, so it'll tell you you've got an alert. When it comes to anomalies, what you've got to remember is there can be different reasons you have an anomaly. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. So if you have, let's say we build an API that we monetize and it's really successful, you're going to get a cost alert because your cost may go up because people are using your application more. That's actually a good thing because you've got revenue probably associated with that. So you would expect your costs to go up. But sometimes it might be somebody misconfigured something. Sometimes we had a good one. So we have another product called Document 360, which is an online SaaS knowledge base. And we had a customer called Midjourney. So I don't know if people have come across Midjourney before. And what was really interesting about them was they signed up online. We didn't really engage with them in that customer signed up. They just came in, stuck a credit card in, bought the app and used it. Then ChatGPT happened. People started looking at Midjourney as well as another OpenAI provider, and their knowledge base just went through the roof. Suddenly our costs start spiking up, and we needed to kind of talk to them about increasing their plan to make sure they got the appropriate service level for their demands. So that's where anomaly detection can really help. Now, what we're doing here is we configured alerts to go out to teams initially. So if there's something not right, let the team know via Teams. Somebody can come in and do something about it. If that alert isn't addressed within a few hours, we then trigger a ServiceNow ticket, and then you get your proper help desk system with an SLA to manage it, just like a bug, like a support incident. And that's the best way to treat these, I would say, get them into a proper SLA-driven support system, because sometimes you might have a cost alert. If you don't address it, it might keep going for days and days and incurring more cost. And we've heard stories where people just ignore alerts, nobody does anything about it, and suddenly your spend, which was down here, is up here, and you've just not been listening to the alerts. Step 3 was cost reviews. So here, what we wanted to get to was the idea of once a month, we just get together for 20 minutes. So previously it would take hours to do cost reviews. Here we got to the point we just get together, as a team, maybe part of your sprint retrospective is quite a good way of doing this. So we've got this little table, and I always talk to the customers that I speak to about where's the needle in the haystack. So in the cost review, you might have hundreds of thousands of lines of billing data. What I really want to know is where do I look to see what the issues are. So here, the cost difference, we're just looking, right, what's my spend last month, what's my spend this month. If it's green, it's good. If it's red, it's bad. So we focus on the ones that are red. We may then dig deeper into it. So we might say, in this case, I think it's logic apps at the top. We might look at individual logic apps, which ones have changed the most. Quite often, so I do a lot of stuff where we'll do a cost review, providing governance to a team. So I'll sometimes say to them, I'll have a quick look at the tool beforehand and go in with some questions to ask, and I'll expect the team to come and tell me about the cost changes in this review. But sometimes I'll go, right, well, tell me why this has changed by this amount. And the team, if we're democratizing the costing, the team should know this, and I'm just providing governance to make sure that, I always talk about this like a personal training. I go to the gym, you can tell I'm not really the best at going to the gym, but personal trainer, his responsibility is to make sure I go when I commit that I'm going to go, make sure I do the exercises that I'm going to do, and then tell me when I'm not trying hard enough. And that's the same idea with a cost review, where you democratize the data so the team can manage it themselves, but somebody needs to make sure they're doing it. And that's really where this would help here. We find all sorts of really interesting things that come up, some good discussion points. I'll tell you later about an example. We found a good re-architecture idea today from one of the cost reviews, which is quite interesting. But really, when you think of a cost review, I want it to be like half an hour. I don't want to spend hours doing it because we've all got other things to do. We then used something called workload optimization. So sometimes I'll use FinOps terms in partner talks. If anybody's interested in this area, FinOps Foundation has loads of really good training and documentation material. But workload optimization is about, can I take a resource in Azure and then I change the plan it's on, or change the size of it based on something like a schedule. So here we had a case with this example where I can create a schedule where green means it's turned on and scaled up, and red means it's turned off and scaled down. So if you think about like a non-prod environment, there's a really big win if you can turn stuff off when it's not being used. So in this case, we had a customer with logic apps running out of hours in the test environments. Nobody uses those logic apps at all. But what was happening is those logic apps were constantly pinging the service bus looking for messages to process. That isn't going to be any because everybody's gone home. So they had dev, system test, an automated build, and a UAT environment with about 80 logic apps per environment, all day sitting doing nothing. So if we turn that off, I think we saved like $1,000 a month just by turning those off, which is kind of crazy waste of money, you know. So that shows you the effect on the logic app costs. You can see as they were migrating stuff, costs were increasing, got fairly stable, and then in this one environment they just dropped to the floor because nobody's using them. And we turned them off, and that was the kind of impact that it has on the cost. That was actually, that was one environment, so you'd see this was like a longer term projection over a number of months, and the blue line was things going into production. So as they migrated stuff, you've got all these new integrations going into prod, and I think it was here was where we turned the optimizer on. So all the non-prod environments were trending similarly to the prod ones. You can see prod was lower because everything hadn't gone into prod yet, but as it went to prod, we turned it on, and the non-prod environment lines would have continued like the blue one. We can see how they leveled off. And then here they would have put some new integrations, probably started getting developed over here, but then they optimized them. You can see how the costs came down again. The next thing we did was right sizing. This is the first one that is like the really big opportunity for most companies. So with a tool, we're getting recommendations of right sizing things. And that basically means, can I take a resource, take a VM as an example, is that VM scaled appropriately for the work that it does? So what happens, the reason right sizing is a thing really is because people build a solution, deploy it into production, maybe they've got templates they build it on, and then nobody looks at it after it got deployed unless the users complain. So what happens is people then go, how big should that VM be? Or I think it should be an extra large. They deploy it into production. The users will never complain because it works brilliantly because it's 10 times bigger than it needs to be. So they get this fantastic service, and then nobody looks at it. You might find that VM only needed to be as small. And I've seen examples of customers with like 10,000 a month savings on one VM. And, that's multiple times I've seen that now. That's just wasted money that you're throwing down the drain. So here, what was really important for us is the thing that makes right sizing difficult is you've got so many things in Azure. Where do you start? All these different teams. So here on the tree view, what we're doing is we're making right sizing scoped to the context of this team on the tree, so we can see all the right sizing recommendations related to the integration team. And then from the right here, we can see where's the biggest one. Let's start with the biggest one. Let's have a look if we can tune that to save money. So what we found was we had things like app service plans could be scaled down, VMs could be scaled down, SQL databases. I'll tell you an interesting one later about SQL databases, but they're just scale stuff down to the right size and save you quite a bit of money. What we did actually as well, just so you know, on here, if you imagine, obviously these are grayed out a little bit, but that would be a VM. I can click that VM, and then the next screen shows you the pop open the metrics, so I can see on the VM what's the usage of it, and I can decide. There is a decision point. You'll get a recommendation that says you could downsize this, but there's still a person who needs to understand what does that VM get used for. Is it an important VM that we need to keep really big for some reason, some kind of service level? We've got the customer, so they may pay for a certain size. Maybe there's other things that it works with that you would never really know unless you understood the whole context. And the information to help you make that decision is really around the metrics. The next one, reservations. So a reservation is where you make a commitment to Microsoft to say, we'll take this VM and we'll commit to this size for a long period of time, for example, a year or 3 years. They'll then give you a discount because you're giving them predictable demand. They'll give you a better price. So it's really good for Microsoft. For you, it may be good or it may not be good, depending. And a lot of people fall into one of two camps. They'll either go, they'll not know reservations exist. So you've heard of stories where customers could save millions by just taking reservations. You don't need to change anything. You just buy a reservation for a year, for example. Reducing costs quite significantly. But they just didn't know they were there because they're a bit hidden away. So again, this problem of the reservations, in this case what helped us is we can see the reservations that apply to the integration team, which makes it easy because we know what we're doing and what we're not doing. But a lot of the times people don't know they're there, or the person who knows they're there is this central admin, but he doesn't know anything about the context of the different things. He doesn't know what this app does, so does it make sense to make a reservation or not? It falls back to that problem of, well, it's not really my job and it's not Kevin's job, so nobody does it. And that's where they get missed. I think one of the things I would say at this point, so I've talked about workload optimizations, right size and reservations. There's really a decision about what you would take. So for example, a VM, you're better off right sizing it before you reserve it, because if you reserve it as a large, but then you want to downsize it, your reservation might be affected by that, so you want to get it the right size. Then you want to choose either reserve it or keep it as pay as you go, but turn it off when it's not being used, or or change the plan size when it's not being used is the best way to kind of handle that. One of the examples here was we just had these non-production data gateway servers. So you can see here it's a little bit small maybe, but that's as simple as changing the started or I think it was start or deallocate was the two states we set. So for us, you can script these things. You can absolutely have a DevOps expert write some PowerShell or CLI script, run it in a pipeline. Do you want to maintain? That's really the question. So if you are looking at third-party tooling, one of the benefits you want is to just get on and click a button and go, that VM, do this, get the job done, move on to the next one. One of the interesting ones we had, so here, again, it might be a little bit small, but we were looking at our cost review, and one of the things that happened was that we had this storage defender cost that I'd never really noticed before, but because we've got rid of a few of the needles in the haystack, this was the next one at the top. You look at it and go, well, what are we paying for here? And we started digging into this cost, and actually we had a whole bunch of function apps and logic apps standard. They have storage accounts that those services use behind the scenes. And we had this cost coming up for what was basically Defender on these storage accounts, and we thought, well, we deployed that like 3+ years ago. Nobody configured Defender, so where's this come from? I haven't quite worked out yet whether, I think Microsoft turned it on by default, but it could have been that one of our admin people centrally turned it on for the entire subscription. One of those two happened. But basically, nobody touched these function apps for 3 years, suddenly we're paying Defender costs, and nobody knows why it got turned on. Now, what we did is, the reason this is important is the price plan that's applied when it was turned on is that it's like a transaction-based pricing. So you pay 2 cents per transaction on the storage account. In this case here, you can see this line's the number of transactions this function app does against the storage account. So what that rolled up to was like 1.6 million transactions a day, where that function app's hitting the storage account to update triggers for things like event hub, service bus. It's not even actually processing any messages at this point. It's just the trigger constantly looking for things to do. We had multiple storage accounts in multiple environments, so it rolled up to be 6,900 a year, just paying for Defender for these storage accounts. That 3 years ago we weren't paying that 6,000. Now that's one of the things where sometimes Microsoft will change something, or something will change completely outside of what you think you're doing, and suddenly the costs have gone up by that and you didn't notice. Now, for us, there's a really interesting architecture question here. So for storage, Defender for storage, if you're doing a website with images in it, and the files getting uploaded, the malware detection features are fantastic. You've got some stuff around detecting things like SAS keys being changed and accessed. For us in this storage use case for function apps, it's really a question about, does Defender give us any actual value? Because there's no business data in there. There's no real kind of, to me, it's questionable whether we need Defender. So option 1, turn it off. Option 2, if you can, again, it's a bit small on the screen there for everybody, but you can change the price plan so that instead of transaction based, there's a newer price plan came out, which is flat rate, which is $10 a month. So I can basically get that 6,900 down to about probably under $100. Just by changing the price plan here. Dead easy change, job done, So coming back to the FinOps Foundation, when we talk to customers, there's a lot of people who, the idea is you do crawl, walk, run is the maturity model for FinOps. Most customers I speak to are in that little box that I've added on the end sit, because most people, I would argue, probably 60% of companies we speak to are really sat there looking at their Azure bill, not really doing anything official about it. It's just somebody made best efforts occasionally produce data because somebody's shouting about what the bill was, but they don't really do anything about it. So this is where my new job's about trying to help people get up this maturity model and do stuff. You've seen, remember this is one team who were already quite efficient, but we still found quite a few savings here. What I try to encourage is analysing costs, set your monitoring up, optimise it, and reanalyse, and you just spend a little tiny bit of time every month just going through that cycle. You'll move up the maturity model and you'll find your team will get better. So for my integration team, we found 53,000 a year worth of cost savings just from the things that I've talked about so far, which is quite a lot of money really when you think about that. That's enough to buy possibly half a developer, a full developer, depending on where you are in the world. What happened from here though was, as happens at a lot of companies, we get to the point where every 6 months somebody goes, oh my god, the Azure bill is way too big, we can't continue like this, should we go to AWS instead? And then obviously they'll go to AWS and we'll have exactly the same problem. Now, what happened here that was different this time is people started going, oh hang on a minute, the integration team almost seem to really know what they're doing here. Can we go and talk to them about what they're doing? What happened then is we started replicating what we did for the integration team for other teams. Now, depending on your company, this could be other departments. You may look at costs from a departmental perspective, HR costs, finance costs if you're doing some kind of cross-charge model. You may look at it as different teams in the IT department who looks after which system, different projects. There's many different ways that you can do cost. What we really want to do is create the relationships between the person who cares about cost management and the technical people to really look at what the cost is and save money. And what I always use the term actionable FinOps. So for a lot of companies, FinOps and cost management's a pretty graph that shows how much money they've spent. But if you really want to save money, you need a plan of things you're going to do to reduce cost, and that's where we need to get to. So as we rolled out across the rest of the organisation, these are some of the stories that I found in, let's say, 2 weeks to a month worth of time, looking at a few teams where they're spending money. This was a fraction of what probably exists. So the first one was a serverless SQL story. So I know quite a bit about this. I've done a lot of Terraform before, and I've built a data platform solution. Part of this data platform solution involved a SQL database that I expected would cost $5 a month. I looked at this graph, and straight away this little line here was telling me something like $1,000 a month was what this database was costing. So I'm, red flag for me, what's going on, something's not right here. The problem was though that we built this environment, handed it over to the data team, they went and used it. We then went on to another project to do other stuff. They've never turned around and said, actually, we don't know what we're spending here, or we feel like we're not getting value for money. Nobody noticed this cost. And what happened was, if you notice here, so SQL Azure is great because one, it's easy to set up. Two, it can be really cheap, but it also could be expensive. In this case, we chose the serverless SQL model. And the important one is if you look down here, Azure's expecting that my costs will be very small. And they will be small if you use the database in the right way, because you can see up here, the utilization is shown it's not being used. However, what happens is if you go and look at the metrics, you'll find there's a metric here called app CPU build. What I notice here is this is constantly getting activity on this database. So what should be happening is that database has one table in it of parameters that they use to, I think they configure it in the Synapse pipelines. It's basically parameters for different things they're doing. So they should hardly ever use that database. But something they're doing in the pipelines is constantly pinging it to check stuff. Based on that, over here when you pick the serverless model, that database can go to sleep when it's not being used and you stop paying for it. But if you ping it all the time, it never goes to sleep. And that's where the database basically costs about $400 per environment. There's 3 environments for one table to query a dictionary of settings, and nobody really realised. So what we can do over here is we can change it to the DTU model, which basically, I think if I remember right, you change it back to provisioned, set the DTUs that we want. I think we set something like 10 DTUs, so we got that $1,000 a month down to about $15 a month, $20 a month, something like that, just by that change. But actually the database performs better because of it, because it's got a bit more meat to work with. Next one was over provisioned SQL databases. So we were looking at one area, and again, a little bit small on the screen here, so I'll apologise, but we had these databases that were showing up as like 3,000 and 4,000 worth of savings on one database. And the first thing that jumped out was resource group needs blah 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 dash UAT. And I think, why are we spending, why are we saving potentially 3,000 on a UAT database? That's obviously costing us a lot more than that. That was one database out of multiple that had exactly the same problem. And what happened was that databases have been deployed from a fantastic bicep or Terraform template that configures them meeting best practices and they're perfect. And nobody realised that we're deploying our UAT database as business critical. So that sets it to the highest SLA. You can see that I think it's 16 cores there, so that's like a 4,000 something database every month. So the first thing you can do is, well, this is UAT, it doesn't need to be business critical. Nobody's ever looked at it because the users are so happy with the performance in UAT. Nobody needs to touch it. There's other things that are on fire that people need to worry about. But if you change this drop down from business critical to standard, cost halves immediately. That's half, 50% saving per database. But it's UAT, so do we actually need 16 cores? It was coming up with a right sizing recommendation to downgrade. So we can maybe remove it 8 cores, maybe half the cost. Again, it's UAT, let's make it have performance problems and scale it up, rather than scale it down if somebody ever has a problem. So we can make it 8 cores, but then it's UAT, nobody uses it after 6 p.m, so we can use that scheduler to say, move it down to 2 cores out of hours, 8 cores during the day. Let's see what happens, and then we can scale it if we need to. So we got this database from 4,300 down to 800 a month. Again, massive saving. Multiply that by multiple databases, and that's one team, not all the other teams. Oh my God moment, this one will scare people. So we had an alert one day, this big spike here that you can see. Jesus. So one day I get an alert and I go, oh my God, we've got a $35,000 a month SQL Azure database. That's somebody's spanner. That's not the bad bit.
That's the best bit.
Yeah. So the next thing I did was I went out and said, right, okay, nobody knows about this, so who do I speak to? And everybody's like, well, I don't know who's doing this. I don't know anything about this. That's the bad bit. We've got a 35,000. Can you imagine, like take a step back from it, imagine any other department in your company where somebody's committed to spending $35,000 a month without getting any kind of approval and nobody knows about it, right? The obvious thing is somebody's getting sacked at that point. But in IT,
Just that.
cloud, we seem to get a free pass for this, which is like, if you tried to go to your director of operations and your CFO, they would be like having a fit if they heard that story, yeah? So here we get the alert. We eventually track down, there's a third-party company who's working with us, common for, most of us have third-party vendors working with us, doing a migration. So we need to migrate this data from on-prem to SQL Azure. Let's make it do it as quick as possible, so let's ramp the database up as big as we can while we do the migration, and then we'll ramp it back down afterwards. So a couple of things are, number one, you need to have thinking about Azure policy, because you at least want to have it checked to stop people doing that unless there's an approval. That's the kind of thing where you really want somebody to have to at least get that approved by the senior manager before they do it. So if ever you get a cost spike and nobody knows where it came from, that's a massive red flag for your process. In this case here, the other thing was, if you can't quite see the dates, but it's the 15th of December here. Everybody breaks up for 2 weeks on the 15th of December. So if they forget to turn that down, you're going to come back after Christmas and you've spent best part of 20 grand before anybody realises. So that was a good catch that we got that scale down at the end of the day before people forgot. It's so easy at a time like that. People, are the migrations still on, and I'll just leave it, I'll check it after Christmas. I think in the interest of time, I'll just skip a couple of these. So this one's really about reservations, just showing the size of reservations that we could take advantage of. Right size, and there's ones here, there's like 3, 4, 5,000 on individual resources. What I think a lot of companies will find, if you're a massive big company, you will find probably stuff like that. But even smaller companies, even our internal stuff, I regularly find there'll be an app service reporting like $100, $50. If you've got a lot of resources, it adds up. 10 resources at $50, that's $5 grand a month you could be saving. So you've got to think, cloud scale also means, that cost will scale with it. So here's an interesting story, a circuit breaker story. So here what happened was, so I'm going to take a step back just from pure cost monitor and think about operations for a second. So this story here is, there's an integration that's built that's event driven. So we have a partner here who submits files every day. They come in over SFTP into a blob storage account. That triggers off an event grid, triggers a logic app, loads it into the SQL database. Pretty easy. This is actually a perfect logic app consumption use case where that partner may submit 10 files a day. It may cost you like a cup of coffee a day, or even less to build a solution. That's a awesome use case for Azure or low-cost integrations or low-cost solutions. The problem you get though is that in this case, some admin came along and was like, oh, we get all these files from this company, need somewhere to put them. Oh no, I'll just use this SFTP server because we've got it, it's used my laptop anyway, let's just put data on there. So they're getting these files archived, let's imagine they're documents of some kind. They archive them on the FTP site, but because it's event driven, that triggers the logic app, which then goes, oh, this is an invalid file, I'll just get it to one side in the invalid file folder and ignore it. And that, it's fine if it's one file, but in this case, the admin who has nothing to do with the project that implemented this, they just happen to be leaving an FTP site somewhere. I had a bug in their PowerShell script and accidentally created a recursive loop that constantly loads files on the FTP server. So it does 100, then 100 come in, and it loads the new 100 plus the last 100, then another 100 come in and loads the 100 plus the last 300. Then so what happens? So this is where cloud's fantastic, but also not fantastic. The good thing is, cloud scale, this is compute based, it just scales and handles it, because that's what we want cloud to do. But the problem is, the cost scales with it, so really what happens here is it just keeps going low and low and low, and your bills going like this. You then have the problem that your process means your support operators are ignoring the cost limits. When you come back on Monday morning, you've spent £4,000 by somebody having a bug in a PowerShell script. So this is where the circuit breaker is a really interesting idea. So the problem with cost data is you're going to be 24 hours behind in most cases. Sometimes you get data coming out of Azure. Sometimes a bit sooner than that, but in general I would say expect your billing date to be from yesterday. So what you might want to do if you've got a cost solution like that, that could be either attacked by a third-party attacker. In that case, really, this could completely have been an internal attack by some disgruntled employee who spent 4,000 there by just accidentally on purpose having a bug in the PowerShell script, but it could be an accident, could be deliberate. When you've got consumption costs that will just scale, you need to think about, do I need a case where I need to put a circuit breaker? And what we did here was we used one of the modules with Turbo 360 where I've got this thing called a run started counter. It says, about every 20 minutes it's checking how many runs have we had. We should have less than 10, but if we've had more than 10 or more than 100, we can just run an operation to disable the logic app. At least that will then trigger alerts, as well as your cost alerts, or trigger your operations alerts. If the ops team come in and just go, ooh, that logic app's done, let's just turn it back on, which is a viable scenario because that's sometimes what happens. It'll spike again, it'll just turn off again, and then that'll mitigate that risk quite significantly. So think about where you might need a cost breaker pattern. Right, duplicate processing, this is quite interesting. This is the one I was talking to my friend about this morning. So we had an integration here where we get a CSV file comes in, Logic App receives the file, we then do a loop and that goes over the file and loads data into SAP and CRM. Now, in this case it's just a Logic App example, predominantly because I'm speaking at an integration conference in a few weeks' time. This could be functions, it could be things like, it could be a web app even where you've got different requests to load data or something like that. Really the key point is you're doing something that the number of actions that you do determines how much you're going to pay. What we were finding was the files we received from the partner, so in this case it was like updates to rail cars, where are they, what they're doing, when are they going to be delivered. But the third-party vendor, which I think is quite a common scenario, they'll send you an entire file rather than just a delta. So all I really wanted to know was that 5 cars have changed since the last file you sent half an hour ago. I'll update those 5, but they're going to send me all 500 records. And what was happening was, when it was originally built, it was assumed it would be a delta. It's now a full file. The logic app just processes them and does all the updates even though the data has not changed. So you can see here, this blue line's kind of one of the environments showing where I guess that third party at certain points they'll take records off the file when they're completed. There's nothing else to update, but you can see here they'll get a batch comes in and then the costs are fairly similar the next few days because you're just processing duplicate data that hasn't changed. Likewise, you've got long periods there where all of that's probably data that hasn't really changed, but this is the cost per day. So I mean, at the minute we're talking like $15 a day processing that file. It's probably only 2 or 3 records actually changed, so we can maybe get rid of them before we do the processing and reduce that cost significantly. So this would be where, for the developers in the room, this is where I want to help you get the low-hanging fruit. I want to get you to the bits where can you make an architecture or a development change to get those additional savings that are going to be a bit harder to get, but you really want to be thinking about them sooner rather than later. If you can catch ones like this in development, it's a lot easier to fix that problem than catching it 6 months after go live where it's going to be harder. So what we did here is you can put it, we received the file. I've actually just stick it off the diagram here, so I can look up yesterday's file from a storage account. I can then run a function that will just do a diff between the 2 files, get rid of the records that haven't changed. Then I do my loop here, and I'm only paying for the bits of the loop that are per record. So maybe for argument's sake, that 500 record file, I get that down to 3 records. And if I get a file every half hour, that costs quite a big difference. If I'm getting rid of 490 odd records every half hour, the reality is while it's 2 boxes here, the logic app might be 4, 5, 6, 10 steps to actually process each record. So I think in this case we're looking at 250 a month, going down to 20 a month processing that one integration, which is quite a good saving again. Okay, so optimization results. So here we had that low-cost SQL Azure database. So we're looking in the region of about 12 to 15,000 a year. That was the first one where it was the tiny little change. We had multiple over-provisioned SQL databases in one team. It's $100 grand a year. That one, oh my God, spike, that's 35 grand a month. Accident, that we mitigated. Reservations and right sizing. So obviously some resources will show there's a possible right size and a possible reservation. A ballpark, if you take $1 million worth of savings in that space, that's a lot of good savings that you can work through tuning, reducing your budget. And the question there is really, what do you want to do with that money afterwards? Suddenly you've now got, I think, $1 million your business is expecting to pay on cloud that it didn't know it was pouring down the hole in the ground. You can now invest that in new projects that you could be doing. You can buy new resources, you can invest in people's training. Might be quite good. I think there's a good question here about how do you incentivize teams to go and look for these cost savings. So that's really where there's a good opportunity when people go back. Actually, one of my takeaways here about being a cost champion. Your organisations probably doesn't know how to start. If you go back thinking about the cost-focused mindset, you might do things like, right, so let's see whichever team, I think this is one of the best ones, whichever team makes the best cost saving this month gets a free night out. Your cost saving could be $1,000 a month, give the team a couple of £100 to go and celebrate their success. One of the things that we did that really made a difference was tell people about your successes. So sometimes, people have probably made savings in the room already, but if nobody knows that you're doing it, one, you don't get any kudos for doing it, but two, people around your organisation don't go, oh yeah, Fred who made that saving, he knows what he's doing about cost, let's go and have a chat with him. He might be able to help us with some of the problems that we're doing. And I think that's where sharing the PR about who's doing good stuff is a great way to start changing the organisational culture. Now, where we want to get to is, we've rebalanced this seesaw. We've moved from being completely focused on enabling users and doing transformation. We now have a sustainable cost. There's an interesting concept for anybody who wants to look at FinOps a bit more called cloud unit economics. So this is the idea of how much revenue or benefit comes into my organisation for the amount of cloud spend for this application. So if let's say a really easy one is my application gets $1 million a month worth of orders and it costs me $800,000 a month to run the application. My profit's really easy to work out, but if I can drop my costs, we all want to increase our orders, but actually if I can get rid of the waste, reduce my costs from 800,000 to 500,000, that's a real big win for your application, and you can build more features that might increase the number of orders. But that cloud unit economics is quite a good way of explaining to business people and finance people how technology can contribute to it. Now, the interesting bit with that, it's quite difficult to work out, especially I find it difficult as a technical person, understanding some of the finance and business concepts to understand what is the value or revenue that your application kind of brings into the organisation. I think that's something I want to learn more about, how to better understand and measure that. I mean, I guess your product owner for your project probably should know that from a business case, maybe be where I would start. And again, coming back to this key point here of sustainable costs, if they're not your top priority right now, they're going to be well up on your priority list over the coming year, I would expect. So hopefully this gives people things to think about. 25 to 40% is what people like Accenture, Deloitte, and the other big companies sort of recommend that people have probably got worth of waste on your cloud expense. You really want to try and see what you can do about it. Now, what I'd like to just do quickly is I want to just share a couple of resources that we've got that I think might help people. So turbo360.com has 2 white papers here that the screen share that. So there's 2 white papers here. One of them is a comparison between Turbo 360 and Azure Cost Manager, really just explaining what the differences are. The one I like the best is the importance of accountability in FinOps. This is me talking about that personal trainer idea, about why do you need somebody to kind of look over your shoulder and just making sure you're doing the good things you should do. If anybody works for a partner or consultancy company, I think there's fantastic opportunities about offering FinOps advisory services to customers, because a lot of customers have people too focused on projects, haven't got time to do it. The CFO wants somebody who he can trust to just keep an eye on his teams and make sure that they're looking after the money that gets spent. I think that's why I speak to a lot of partner organisations for us, where it's really like a consultancy company who wants a tool to help them offer a service. We also have this podcast called FinOps on Azure, which I host. So what I'm trying to do with a podcast that people might find interesting. I think FinOps foundation type podcasts, they're very much, they either have quite a strong AWS influence to them, or they're very much focused on the finance concept. And I think there's been a gap around how do I implement cost management strategies in Azure. So that's the place I'm trying to be. But I want to go below just the finance concept and dig better into the technical bit. So you'll see here I've got cool things like this podcast here in the middle. What's the relationship between SecOps, security, and FinOps? Which at a high level you think, well, why does that matter? But actually, if you get talking to security guys about cost management, and there's a good friend of mine, Nino, we had this really good discussion about, well, actually there's conflicting requirements but also compatible objectives. So security teams want you to use the maximum amount of secure network and security features. You saw the Defender one's a really good example earlier. So they just want the maximum security without any real thought about what is the cost. And the cost person wants the cheapest cost. And there's a big trade-off between those two people. So how do you understand where the right balance is? And that's the kind of thing we're talking here. We were talking about, I've got one coming with Richard from Black Normal down at Bradford, talking about the relationship between DevOps and FinOps, and kind of how Richard made this great line of FinOps keeps DevOps honest because it gives it the governance to make sure the resources that you configure are done in a cost-conscious way, which I thought was really interesting. So I've had some great discussions over here. We've got Cosmos DB team I'm talking to tomorrow. We'll be recording it where everybody I've spoken to really struggles to understand how to run Cosmos DB in a cost-effective manner. And it's weird because it can be so cheap. You get like a really good free tier actually on Cosmos DB, but it can get crazy expensive as well if you're not careful. So we want to get the team on and ask them those hard questions about how do I scale this up and still keep it cost effective. I think it's good. So hopefully, I hope you guys enjoyed my talk. Hopefully I didn't go too much over time. Please feel free to reach out if anybody wants to have a chat, whether it's just generally, if you want to learn more about what we're doing in 20360, feel free to reach out as well. But enjoy the rest of tonight. Thank you. I'll just take questions during the break if you want, if anybody has any.
The one I've got is like, how do you convince people high up in the business that this is something that he's looking at, and how do you stop them from just going, all right, well, you deal with it, because obviously you're developers, and now we're DevOps, where we're doing YAML pipelines and stuff. I've heard DevSecOps being thrown around, where it's like, oh, you developers are now responsible for security as well. How do you stop it becoming, you're now FinDevSecOps?
Don't give them ideas.
To be honest, that's part of the talk, the podcast where Richard's talking a little bit about some of that. But if you're in the FinOps world, having senior stakeholder buy-in is one of the most important things to be successful. If you look at it from the FinOps perspective, because everybody's spending money, and if you can't get your senior management to buy in to saving money, it's never going to work. However, that problem there is the exact. So if you take my slide. Right at the start, so this one here. So the whole point of this slide is that this poor chap here gets dumped on. That poor chap there gets dumped on because they're the only person who sees the cost data. And everybody's going, I don't see the cost data, I need a report. You spend ages getting the data, crafting it in Excel, giving it to people, and then 3 weeks later it's completely out of date and nobody's done anything, you've just wasted that person's time. That's why we've built tooling, because we think that's a really big problem. I want that expert to be actionable FinOps that I said before. I want that person to get a plan of things they want to work through and tune the costs. Some of them will be resize a VM, some of them will be let's make an architecture change to this app, some of them will be let's do a reservation. We don't want that person doing low value tasks of processing data in Excel because it's a waste of their time. To get buy-in for the senior management, I think a lot of companies, it'll happen anyway because the CFOs going to get so, we see this right now, CFOs are getting to the point where the IT management cloud cost, but it's now upper level. The overall board are complaining about cloud cost and they don't see anything happening about it. So I think that'll start solving itself when you get people saying this is no longer sustainable, we need to do something about it. And the question is more, what people do you use in your organisation? What process do you use? What tools do you use to help you? Put my Turbo 360 hat on again. That's why I want to speak to companies, because I want to make my life easier. I want to sit up and I want to sell my product to help you do it. But we speak to plenty of companies who do their own scripts, do their own Excel stuff. You can make it work, but the important thing, just from saving money and getting on top of the problems, there needs to be a company commitment to doing it. I think that PR thing I said before, if you have a success, tell people about it, because they'll want to replicate what you're doing and they'll want to speak to you. I think that idea of if you go away and you're thinking about these things, you become the company's cost champion, that's a great position to be in. Senior management are always going to go, can we get this guy to come and do this meeting, because he's going to be the one who makes sure the solution doesn't waste money. And every senior management person is going to buy into that, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a lot of kind of things like policies and alerts and things like that. Are many of those organisations that you give an example of adopted like adoption framework? Adopted it well, sorry, I should say.
Yeah, two great questions. Some of them have adopted it. I've never met a company yet who's really said cloud adoption frameworks really being a differentiator between us being good and bad. I think that probably, the more companies you speak to, the more I think that will come up.
Yeah.
I think that the problem, it always comes back to this thing, people are so busy enabling users, delivering new value. People haven't had time to really think about the sustainability problem. I think even if you just go beyond just the frameworks, the landing zones, and that kind of thing, you look at the basics like tagging. People have, sometimes we meet a company who's invested a lot of time in tagging and it really helps them out. Probably 90% of companies I speak to either have no tagging or massively inconsistent tagging across applications, and they've not really put any thought into it. And then we have other companies where what was I going to say? I've got a blank work. But it's just such a big smart.
Yeah, I think
Thank you, everybody.